but what does reality look like? And this is where I want to move on and look at the non-professional threat. I am very lucky to have worked in many different contexts, and I travel a lot because of my work. And the constant feature I encounter is individuals who work as English language teachers and earn money as professionals without having any or adequate or sufficient teacher training or education. I see some people going, yeah, you recognize the scene. And in a way, if what we describe should be the norm, this could be construed as an anomaly, but is it? And I want to, if I have to sort of categorize the kind of non-professional individuals that I've encountered in my career, I would just create two types, which you may or may not recognize. I encounter wherever I go. One is what I call type 1, the native speaker conversationalist. You recognize him, don't you? I'm talking about the guy that thinks that all you need to know to be able to teach English is to speak it. And type 2 is what I called the B2, but replace the B2 with B1 or C1, certificated user. More about this in a minute. And I'm going to spend a few minutes with each of the types. And I want us again to compare these types with what we said before about what is professionalism in English language teaching. So, type 1, the native speaker conversationalist, very, very much in demand. I looked up some advertising websites day before yesterday, and of course they're in demand. So native speaker wanted says this ad. I'll just read to you very quickly. Lots of money in China. And if you read the small print of the details of the job, now the qualifications that you need to have are to be a native English speaker. So that's a good qualification. Bachelor's degree preferred. Don't be over 40, need not apply. Now, TEFL or TESOL is desirable, but not required. Experience preferred, but not strictly required, and what I really like is number 6, high spirit of adventures and a sense of humor. So again, this no teaching qualifications required. Another case, Russia. Same story. Native speaker of English. Now let's look at the detail. The main responsibility of a teacher here is to perform lessons of speaking practice for students of different level and age using board games from time to time. You might be relieved to know that we have a lot of board games. Okay, so this is the kind of profile we are looking for. Again, no EFL teaching qualifications required. Now, let's look at it from the other side. This is people wanting, so organizations wanting this type. Let's look at this type advertising his services, yeah? And this is a profile from LinkedIn, which I looked at 3 months ago. This is a real person. Let's call him John. Now, John advertises himself as a native speaker conversationalist. And let's look at his qualifications for the role. First thing he says, jack of all trades and master of none. Wonderful. Now, if we look at his area of expertise, it's not CLIL, it's actually, he says, let me just, before we move on, let me just tell you about a bit about his relevant experience for the job. I've worked as a customer service rep in retail chains, lower management, and a pharmaceutical chain, a mechanic, and a collision repair technician. So these are the relevant qualifications and experience for the job. And then specialization. The one thing, this is great, isn't it, that I bring to the table in any job I worked is my personality. Now, you might want to know that I'm outgoing, honest, brutally at times, and diplomatic. How he can be diplomatic and brutally honest, it eludes me, but that's not part of my conversation and my talk, so let's move on. Basically, let's go back to what Diaz Majoli identified as the expectations of a professional teacher, and let's analyze John with reference to that. First thing, educated broadly and well. Let's give John the benefit of the doubt. We don't know, but his qualification, his past experience doesn't seem to give us a lot of indication of that. Knowledge about the field to be taught, knowledge about English. No evidence of that. Familiarity with educational psychology? Not really, that we are aware of. Knowledge about the profession of education? No evidence of that. And yet, he earns money like you and me as a teacher of English. Type 2. This is a person, like me, when I was a teenager, who learned English as a foreign language, so lives in a country where English is not the first language, and passed a test of proficiency at some level, yeah? B1, B2, C1. And this is the strength for which he or she is being employed, having passed a B1, a B2 level of English. Let's look at this again. Educated broadly and well, let's give her the benefit of the doubt, we don't know. Knowledgeable about the fields to be taught, well, let's give it a question mark because C1, maybe. B1, familiar with how learners develop, behave and learn. Yeah, she had the experiential knowledge of learning English, but not necessarily the psychological, theoretical knowledge to understand how learners learn, so no. Knowledge about the profession of education? No. And yet, she earns her living as a teacher of English. An associated topic that comes with this B1, B2, C1 certificated user is the issue of language proficiency. And this has been a hotly debated topic in the conference and sector, if you like, in the conference circuit and in social media lately. So last year, for example, Cambridge English set up the language debate and asked a very interesting question. What language level does a teacher need to have? And before this debate, Cambridge English conducted a survey of a number of teachers, and these were the results. Teachers from all over the world saying at least 2 Common European Framework levels above the students, 51% of the teachers said that. At least 1 Common European Framework level above the students, 12.9% of those teachers, and native speaker-like proficiency, 35.6% of the teachers. In this year's IATEFL conference, International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, again, it was a hotly debated topic, so debated and so hot that it went on and on and on. And for example, the TEFL Equity Advocates website took it on and asked this question again. The question was, what is the minimum proficiency level for a teacher? And it was the most popular thread in the history of the website. There were 112 comments of teachers talking about this, and it went on in Facebook and in Twitter. So I just wanted to show you a representative sample of the comments there. I've chosen the disturbing ones. They're more fun. Let's have a read. I don't know if you see this well, so I'm going to read it out loud. If a teacher teaches only elementary level, then surely they only need to be 1 step ahead of the learners, at best pre-intermediate level. I've seen plenty of 1 step ahead teachers whose English was bad, but absolutely fine for elementary level, and it's worked well. Moving on swiftly. Coming back to this in a minute. Better to take the teachers you can get than no teacher at all. And finally, very quickly, this is a very famous writer and teacher trainer, so I find this particularly disturbing, because he's an influencer. Theoretically, there is no reason that a teacher need know the target language at all. She needs simply have the pedagogical skills to create the conditions for learning it. So that's what people are thinking. Not everybody, hopefully, but that's what some people are thinking. So I want to explore very briefly this idea of 1 step ahead teaching. Thankfully, somebody in the website actually provided the answer, so I don't even have to tell you what I think, because I think that. And this is a comment from somebody on the website. And he's saying, this was a major problem I saw in Korea. Many teachers with little or no proficiency were forced to teach English with terrible results. I've seen 1 step ahead teaching. It's not pretty. I've seen 1 step ahead teaching. It's not pretty. But more importantly, this idea that you are bad and you're perfectly fine for elementary. How can English teachers whose English is described as bad be absolutely fine for any level? Can they be adequate models of language in all its aspects? Lexis, grammar, pronunciation, spelling, discourse, you name it. Can they be adequate models? I'm going to ask you to read this for a second. These are two descriptors from the Common European Framework. And I want you to think about whether these two descriptors describe a professional teacher. So I'm going to give you time to read them. I don't know what you think. My answer is no. And this is B1. And this is B1. So, for me, is the one step ahead teacher a professional? My answer to that is no. I was a one step ahead teacher of my classmates when I was 15 years old, and my best friend loved PE but didn't like English. That is a one step ahead teacher. Language teachers are professional language specialists whose job is to help learners become successful English language users. The one step ahead teacher doesn't do that for us. Thank you very much. But interestingly enough, my problem is that we always look at the issue of language proficiency with reference to the likes of me, the so-called non-native speaker. And interestingly enough, we don't look as closely at the literacy issues around the so-called native speaker. And I would like you to read these two paragraphs from a postgraduate diploma candidate's assignment. Have a look at it and have a look at that English there. This is a teacher. This teacher has issues with, just by looking at those two paragraphs, coherence, cohesion, order of information, accuracy, referencing conventions, spelling, and punctuation. We need to look at the literacy issue around the so-called native speakers. This is important, and it is development material. It is professional development material that I don't know why we don't often look at. It's the elephant in the room. So what is the problem with the non-professionals? Basically, that they devalue competent professionals and that they depreciate professionalism in English language teaching. Hattie recently talked about attacks on professionalism and expertise, and he identified particularly these two. One, when people make strong claims that teachers are born and not made. More about this in a minute. And two, allowing people in classrooms to go unprepared. If you put these two attributes in a person, Alex Moore created a character type, and he calls it the charismatic subject made in heaven. And I want to spend 1 minute looking at the charismatic subject made in heaven because he is an attack on professionalism. So, John, welcome back. The charismatic subject made in heaven believes in personality. And there's this emphasis on the teacher as personality. What the implications of this is that the qualities of good teachers are inherent. You are either born good or not. Which means then that you don't need training if you have the right staff. Now, if the qualities of good teaching are inherent, if you're born a good teacher, what hope is there for development and improvement? But equally, the charismatic subject made in heaven is over-reliant on his high-profile personal attributes, his popularity, his ability to enthuse and inspire students. And in our schools, this is a very popular teacher. That's why we want to keep him, don't we? However, let's look deeply. This person normally has a very idiosyncratic teaching style. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes, as an organization, you want to push for excellence. And you want to identify areas of excellence according to research, etc., etc. He will not play. Normally unprepared, not a planner, not a believer in planning. It's all about me. It's not about them, it's about me. Highly individualistic. And normally an institutional rebel. So again, for any learning together, for any collaboration, for any drawing of, standards of quality and professional development, he will not want to play. So I had to conclude by saying, imagine amateurs, no matter how bright, to be doctors or pilots or engineers or dentists with no training. Now, my question is, why is this not just a possibility in our profession, but a widespread reality? This is a widespread reality in our industry. And I want to briefly explore the causes of this. And I personally identified 3. You might have more and tell me more about it at dinner time or tomorrow. 1, market forces. 2, poor strategic planning. And 3, lack of public awareness. So let's explore them briefly. Market forces, the famous law of demand, supply and demand. And in many, many contexts, demand for teachers far outweighs supply. And we resort to desperate measures, don't we? We need to staff. The issue of cost. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but who doesn't need to do efficiency savings in their organization? These are difficult times, aren't they? And you may be tempted to think in these terms. If you think of your teachers, if you place your teachers in a continuum from not qualified or unqualified to qualified to really very qualified and expert, and cost. Of course, the more qualified, the more expert, the more expensive. And sometimes you may be tempted to make that efficiency saving, i.e., let's not renew the contracts of the more experienced and more qualified because they're more expensive and we need to save money. So let's look again, or remind ourselves, on how expert teachers make a difference. We are in the business of improving learner outcomes. So what sense does it make to save on the expert teachers? As Newell says, why keep pouring scarce resources into a leaking barrel when it is cheaper and more effective to repair the barrel? We need to consider how to conserve and develop the workforce. Conserve and develop the workforce. Make teachers feel valued and self-efficacious. Poor strategic planning. We've all seen this, where, educational reform or reform at systems level requires to make quick changes, and we don't really think through the implications for teacher expertise requirements. So we've seen this, we've been here, we've seen, for example, whole governments, ministries of education and institutions of higher education saying, okay, CLIL, we're all going to start teaching CLIL, or we're all going to start English as the medium of instruction by next year. Or, English will be taught in primary schools in 2 years' time, without thinking what it actually means for those teachers who actually need to do this job. Finally, lack of public awareness. And this is at many levels. When I talk to people who are not in our industry and in our profession, they're not really aware of the qualifications that professional teachers need to have. They're not aware of the difference in quality between a reputable awarding body and a reputable teacher training organization and one that's not, or spuriously accredited. Or of the difference in quality between a professional and a non-professional teaching service. The less reputable make a feast out of this, and they market this to their advantage. So an example of this landed in my inbox on Monday, Groupon. You know Groupon? Groupon is a sort of deal of the week service. Okay, look at that. Accredited online 180-hour TEFL course and 2 specialist teaching mindfulness courses thrown in the mix. Who wouldn't want that? Discounted, from 150 to 49 quid. The deal, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but basically, when you look at the small print, you realize that there is absolutely, in this course, no required observed and assessed teaching practice. So, going back to Malderez and Wedell, does it provide any know-about? Of course it does. You read about it, you watch some videos, you do some quizzes. Does it help these teachers with their know-how? No. Does it help the teachers with the most crucial skill? No. But the public doesn't know this. So, with all this crazy cocktail, is it any wonder that we have a bit of an image problem as an industry? I heard it said that we are the Cinderella of education, or the aromatherapy of education, with all the connotations of, not serious alternative, the poor relative, and all that. So I wanted to actually situate our own profession with other professions and see why we have this perception problem. So I looked at common features of professionals in other professions. Doctors, lawyers, architects. And these are the features. They have high social status, they're well paid, they're accountable to their clients for their work, they belong to a professional body, they have had a considerable period of professionally focused education beyond their first degree in preparation for their role, considerable. They keep up to date with developments in the field, and they are autonomous. So, for me, as I looked at those results, I thought the following, that teacher professionalism in our industry really is socially situated in a very dynamic construct, shaped but very specific. It's very different. It looks very different in many different contexts, what it means to be a professional teacher. But I think what's important here is to think, as a teacher moves from one context to another, which very often happens, is what happens with their training and their development. Say, for example, you trained initially as a primary school teacher, and then suddenly you get a job in the corporate world. Can you safely assume that the learning that you did and the skills that you develop will transfer automatically and easily and effectively from one context to the next? So this is where we really do need to think very carefully about what professional training and development we provide for teachers once they're in the job. So finally, initial teacher training, I'm going to breeze through this. Here I want to really focus on the short international teaching certificate. And I want to focus on this because at the moment it's one of the most popular qualifications in the world. The qualifications, certificate in the world. That was conceived for the private language school sector as a means of training teachers that then work for my school. A very practical, non-theoretical based program based on a very intensive and hands-on apprenticeship model. Sit with Nelly, copy what I do. And a viable option, of course, for the native speaker conversationalist, which basically, it's a very good toolkit of techniques and strategies for survival in the classroom, whatever the classroom means. But the question for me is, once that is over, how appropriate is that for working in different contexts and for the higher order professional learning that leads to a teacher being really self-efficacious? As King says, the problem with the popularity of this kind of very short 1-month course is that because it became popular, it became widespread. Okay? And the candidates doing this course come from very many different contexts. So how well do these qualification programs continue to meet the needs of the increasingly diverse candidature of ELT practitioners? I'm going to move on, but basically to move on, Moore says, we need to abandon the easy answer, the 1-month answer. In particular, those which claim universality. Sometimes I find like it's a little flat-packed furniture kind of program. Wherever I go, it comes with me, and I do the same. It doesn't matter where I teach, anything, at what level, in what country. Finally, what can we do to professionalize more our sector and our industry? What can organizations do? This is the most, if you have to keep one message about my talk, this is the one I want to leave you with. As leaders, prioritize leadership of learning over simply managing organizations. What do I mean by this? Here are the 5 most impactful leadership dimensions that have an impact on student outcomes. I'll read these quickly in case you can't see. Establishing goals and expectations, resourcing strategically, planning, coordinating and evaluating teaching and the curriculum, promoting and participating in teacher learning and development, and finally, ensuring an orderly and supportive environment. And guess which one is the most impactful? Yes, promoting and participating in teacher and learning and development. Actually, it's got twice the impact as the next most impactful activity. This is why you want to keep your expert teachers, and this is why professional development is the most important activity that we need to be doing. And it's the one that's first to go when we need to make efficiency savings. Don't. Protect it. So, ensure that teacher professional learning is identified as a priority. And make time for professional learning and make it part of the culture of learning in your organization. Invest in professional development, because investment now is saving on costs in the future. See it as an investment. And of course, implement CPD programs that you know work, and not because of your intuition, that there is research evidence that they work. I have no time to deal with those, but basically, headline, classroom-based collaborative professional inquiry. As part of the publications that Cambridge CUP are developing and publishing now, there's a white paper called What's New in ELT Besides Technologies, which I co-wrote with Scott Thornbury. And part 4 of this paper talks about this, collaborative professional inquiry. So once it's out, make sure you read it. So finally, let's go back to that comment of better to take the teachers you can get than no teacher at all. For sure. Better than nothing. However, these teachers sometimes need significant professional development. So it's very, very important that we give that professional development. As Matthew says, we are not going to get better outcomes if we don't have better teachers. So let's just invest in them. Or as Dylan Williams says, love the one you're with. What does this mean? It means let's support the teachers that we already have with ongoing, systematic, job and classroom embedded professional learning opportunities. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have no time for questions, but I will appear again on Friday in the panel. So if you want to ask me any questions or dinner or whatever.